I'm Sara Woods, Director of the Kentucky Book Festival, a program of Kentucky Humanities. Welcome to the 2020 Kentucky Book Festival online. We're pleased you've taken time to join us for this special festival that brings together authors, readers, and literary enthusiasts from across the country and the Commonwealth, just like we've done for 39 years. All of our Kentucky Book Festival conversations would not be possible without the generous support of our sponsors. Today, the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning is bringing you an evening of poetry. If you would like to submit a question, please do so in the Zoom Q&A box. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this discussion with Nikky Finney, Reginald Dwayne Betts, in conversation with Frank X. Walker. Frank, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you so much. What an honor to be among friends. The hard part of this is, I think we're supposed to read, but I really just want to talk to these good people. There's so much that we have in common and would love to catch up on. But I know we need to move these books. So my first question to both of you is, they say that you can't judge a book by the cover. But I've been studying your book covers, and I know that there's a whole lecture behind both of them. I would love to hear you talk about those covers, and particularly art in general, specifically how art interfaces with your personal and professional life, and how all of that came together to let you know that this was the perfect cover for this particular collection. Dr. Finney.
Hello, Frank Walker. Hello, Reginald Dwayne Betts. Hello, Kentucky Book Festival. Hello, Kentucky and the world. I'm honored and giddy to be here tonight to just be in conversation, like Frank said. That's one of my favorite C words. Your question, Frank, is really maybe two-part or maybe three or four-part. One, don't believe those old sayings. I always deconstruct them and wonder, maybe that was for a particular book, but I don't know about judging a book by the cover, but certainly the cover of Love Child has a lot to do with what's inside. And so I don't always get to have a lot to say about what the cover is going to look like. Sometimes books arrive with the wonderful art director having already made that choice. Head Off and Split had nothing to do with that cover. It was so perfect when it arrived. I could have just imagined that it was going to be something like that. Love Child's Hotbed of Occasional Poetry has two things on the cover that mattered greatly to me. One are these black lines, the La Nea Negra, which is the title poem in the collection. And that is the line that goes down a pregnant woman's belly. And so I wanted this book to be a visual of my La Nea Negra, though I never had one, never gave birth to a child, but I'm always thinking visually. I'm always thinking about how something how I can look at something one way and then reinterpret it another way. That's what I love about poetry. I love the double entendre. I love the 5 different meanings you can bring to something if you think deep enough about it. We can talk about that some more, but the other thing is my father's handwriting is on the cover. And so that was a surprise when the art director chose, this book has some of his letters and his notes inside. And so she took his actual handwriting from one of those notes and superimposed it on the cover. And so when I got the book, I couldn't believe it because his handwriting was always beautiful to me and always meant a lot to me. And so the book meant even more. And that was a little secret. Lastly, I am visually inclined. I am always working for the reader to see, hopefully to see what I'm talking about. Art means, as you know, Frank, means a great deal to me. I don't think I would be a poet without the visual. I don't think that I could actually find the right words without having that visual stimulation. I often have a frightening moment when I think what would happen to me if I lost my sight, because I lean on it so much in terms of writing and in terms of stimulation and in terms of going immediately to my journal to think about what I've just seen. And so it means everything to my words.
Thank you. Brother Betts.
Man, I hadn't thought about that line, and I didn't know it was a name for it. And I remember it distinctly, you know, when my wife was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
It was like it just showed up. and nobody, you know, he didn't come from a place where people really explain these things to you. And so yeah, it's funny, man. I hadn't thought about it in like a long time. And I think visually too, and even the way that just that description brought back a memory of a moment that I just haven't experienced in a minute. And I always want to write poems that do that. And that's why I think imagistically, because you know, I'm trying to find a narrative. And even when I think about covers, I'm trying to find a narrative. And so I said 2 quick stories. Like Shaheed reads his own poem. I was thinking about a title, right? And I went to a palm reader 3 times. The first 2 times I was in New York, same night. I'm in New York. We go to the spot. I call in advance and they say they open, but we get there and they close. Or maybe I Googled it and it said it was open and we got there and it was closed. Then I called the second spot and I was like, yo, I'm coming through. Y'all there? And they're like, yeah, we there. If you get here in X minutes, you know, we straight. I get there and the people running out the door like, oh, something happened. Gotta go. What? You just told me. And it's pouring down raining. And then the third time I'm driving up the highway, right? And I see a palm reader and I'm in Maryland on 301. And it had like 2-3 cars parked on the grass, felt southern as hell, and my stereotypical vision of what the South is, right? Like Dukes of Hazzard, you know, cars parked in the grass. And I'm like, yo, that's the spot. So I bust a U, I go up, the lady tell me how much it costs, and she looks at me, this ain't for you. And I was like, what? I just left. So then I titled my book, Shaheed Reads His Own Poem, because if you get rejected by 3 palm readers, you got to stop going. You know, it's a wrap. And that artwork I commissioned, and I didn't really know I was commissioned, and I was a broke artist. And I asked somebody, if he could hook me up with a cover. And I thought that he was just, you know, going to draw a sketch it or do it on the computer. And then it ended up being a piece that was probably like 60 inches by 25. It came with a price ticket that I couldn't afford. And I was like, bro, this costs more than my book paid me, period, you know? And I gave him the money, man. It didn't hurt my heart, actually. And it was a piece of artwork that I bought that I felt like it wasn't even investing in the art or the artist, but I felt like I was invested in my art because, you know, it's a poem that's real colorful and it's like a totem. And it just perfectly captured the spirit of the book. What does it mean to read your own lifeline? And then when I came out with Bastards of the Reagan Era, I was so mad that I was like, you know what? I don't want cover art. And I told my editor, I told Martha Rose, I was like, listen, I don't want no art on the book. I don't want my name on the book. We could call it Bastards of the Reagan Era, but I don't even really know if I wanted to have a title at all. You know, I'm tired of the poetry world telling me that my work is redundant and I'm supposed to starve and dance for y'all, and y'all giving me these like bootleg awards that don't feed me. I was like, I don't want nothing. I want the book to be all Black. And she was like, well, that's not gonna happen. And I don't think we're gonna call it Bastards of the Reagan Era. And I was kind of adamant, you know. And we called it Bastards of the Reagan. And, you know, one of the questions was, would people review it if we called it Bastards of the Reagan Era? And we called it Bastards of the Reagan Era. And I got the all Black cover, but I had to have my name on it. And it was cool because for me, it was like a book that I felt meant a lot because it's the first time that I wrote a book for the art. And I wasn't like concerned. I mean, the first time I was too, but it was like everything I needed to say in the first book. And the second book was like fully like, whatever, you know, I don't care how you look at it. And that's why I didn't want any art on the cover. And then the last one is my man, Titus Kafar. And I think, you know, it's just like says it all, you know what I mean? And me and him got like a long history and our work was connected even before we met each other. It was a couple of these pieces that was linked. I got commissioned to do something for the Harvard Architectural Magazine, and he did as well. And they linked our work, but we were both so busy that when they gave us our copy of the magazine, we never opened it up. And then 5, 6 years later, I'm like, oh shit, I was in that magazine. And he's like, you was? I was in there too. I was like, what you do? He's like, man, I don't even remember. He's like, what you do? I was like, I don't remember either. And I flipped the magazine open, and they had paired his work with mine. And it was like a year before we met. And this was after I had chose this work for Felon. And it felt like it was perfect because in this case, I did feel like the work needed the art, and the art said something about the work, both in terms of like me and his relationship, which is like the lower frequencies that you only know if you know us, but also the way that his work was exploring identity, incarceration, and erasure, and my work in the piece was trying to do the same thing. So yeah, that's cool, man. I gotta think of that line again though. I might have to write a poem about that. I tell Therese we need to do this one more time so I can appreciate that line a little bit more.
That'd be a perfect excuse.
Hey, Frank, can I add one thing?
Sure, please.
So in one of the things that I love about one of the things that brings me to poetry is ekphrastic poetry. I love, when I was a younger poet and when I didn't kind of know what I was doing, I would go into, not that I'm completely clear about that right now, but when I would go into a museum or when I would see a piece of art, somewhere, I would immediately just start describing it or saying in my journal what it said to me, or what, not thinking I would make something out of it. But it was those exercises in looking at something visual, looking at a piece of art, or looking at a photograph, or something else, a concrete thing, and trying to describe it and trying to bring it alive to me. That really were my first exercises in what I was trying to do. And that wasn't in a classroom, that wasn't a workshop. It was just me one-on-one with something in the world. It could be a leaf or a tree, or, I was that kind of, quirky minded little girl that always had a pencil and a notebook somewhere. So I really, I just thought about that when you were asking about visual and what the visual means. It's everything. It's center of how I came to understand that I was a poet and that I wanted to really get better at describing these things and bringing them alive. And that started at 9 or 10, actually.
Yes. And that's clear in this new book. I mean, there are so many pieces that do exactly what you just described. It's you at different ages of interrogating the subject in the most beautiful way. And this leads me to the next question, because the beauty and both of your relationships with the art are not limited to the cover. When you open Felon, I mean, the erasure by itself is so powerfully, impactful immediately that you can't turn the page. You have to investigate it and try to figure out what's going on, even if you've never heard of it before. And all the artifacts that you have in your book, Nikky, I was amazed at how I was trying to peel up the Post-its because it looked so real when they added the shadow. I mean, I know you had to be pleased with how wonderfully accurate they made those. Could you guys talk about the art on the inside of the books? Why you felt like it was important to have more than the traditional poems on the page and to have those extra things?
Dwayne, why don't you take that? Starting off.
Yeah, I thought, well, I mean, for me, honestly, I'm a lawyer, and I was in law school, and it was a real question of what does poetry have to say to the law and vice versa. And typically, these documents are distancing. It's a legalese that's frequently used. The idea is to use a kind of ornate but impenetrable language. And even the way they situate the footnotes within the text makes it harder to read the text. You can't just read a sentence. You like da 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 82 P2D 888. And he was like, what does that mean? You know, and it's clearly signaling that this is not for you. And they could footnote the legal text. They could footnote to the cases for, you know, the scholars to know where it is. They don't have to put all of that sort of jargon in the text. And I thought, you know, these cases were about how unconstitutional and morally bankrupt it is to lock people up because they couldn't pay traffic fines and like small bail. To lock people up because they couldn't pay bail or traffic fees is sort of unconscionable. And I had this case that was describing this stuff, and I thought, you know, my folks can't understand it. My mom can't understand it. My cousins can't understand it. My grandmama can't understand it. And I chose to redact it first as a way to protest against how the document exists and the sort of American understanding of what of how you get justice. I wanted to say, what if, you know, a poem is a better vehicle for justice than this legal document? So how do I turn this legal document into a poem? And typically when they redact documents, they redact things because they say that what's under the redaction line is above your pay grade. I wanted to redact things and say what's under the redaction lines is superfluous. And you know, messing around with Titus, it just so happens that I had did this, and I was like, yo, this is kind of visually arresting. And so what if you know, what if we worked together? And we were planning on working together, and we were trying to throw around ideas. And when we realized that this was like a visual thing all its own that would allow us to collaborate and allow us to do something where the text wasn't the substrate for the visual art, and the visual art wasn't the substrate for the text, and that it could like commingle and actually be a legit partnership. So that was my going into it. It was, I wasn't planning on making visual art. I just was planning on trying to viscerally demonstrate me not trying to make the text say something different, but me attempting to make the text say what the text wanted to say, which is how profoundly ruinous it is to have a system that locks somebody up in a jail cell because they owe $1,500 in traffic tickets.
Thank you for that, those details. I have to ask the follow-up question about, isn't there a new font, a redaction font that you're connected to?
Oh, yeah. We, you know what I mean? We were trying, we were like, how do you do this? And Titus worked with this cat named Forrest Young, and it turns out that fonts have histories too. And we get it. Actually, it echoes, you know, your father, Miss Nikki, it echoes your father's handwriting, right? It has a history to it, and you respond to that history. And fonts have histories too, and sometimes their histories aren't the kind of history that we want to be wedded to. And frequently, we don't know the history of the font, but it's an artist that made the font, right? And so we wanted to own, in a sense, and create, in a sense, the font that would characterize this work that we were doing. And so I ended up using a redaction font. Forrest Young and his partner, this other cat named Jeremy, they created the font, and we met with him, and we really talked about what it is we wanted to do. And the font actually like redacts itself. And so as you blow it up, and the thing is, like, we wanted to make the font reveal more as you look closer. So as the font is larger, you see the details in the font that you missed, but that's the same way the poem is. If you read it once, you're gonna miss some stuff. If you read it 2 or 3 times, it begins to open itself up and reveal things. And so that's what the font does. When you enlarge it, that's sort of the same as like reading it multiple times. As you enlarge it, you just see the notches. You see how it redacts itself. You see how it's subtly different, but echoes the standard legal fonts that get used in court cases. And it's cool, you know, because we got different iterations of it because we made prints with these, and the prints have different iterations of it. So you could actually see it at scale. And think about, you know, when you protest and you carry around a sign, you're communicating things 5 or 6 or 7 different ways, in the same way that, you know, graffiti is communicating things in multiple different ways. But as a writer, like, they didn't tell me that. I didn't have choices about my font on my first 2 books. And now, you know, I go into it, I'm like, wait, we got to have a conversation about the font. And they're like, huh? I criticize people, man. You send me something that's in Arial because it's the default font, I'm gonna talk bad about you. I'm gonna be like, man, come on, for real? You ain't had time to choose a font? You know, even my son is picking Comic Sans embarrassing us, embarrassing the family. Like you could pick you a font. So yeah, it's cool, man. Thanks for asking that, because the font was one of the things we sort of most proud of in terms of creating something that has like multiple layers and legacies that live beyond what it is that we did as artists.
Thanks for that. Nikky, springing on the word legacy, you just mentioned, took me straight to so many photographs in your collection, your new collection. You know, the photographs, the post-its, the letters to you and from you in your 9-year-old hand. And where does all that live? Is there a treasure chest somewhere in your mother's house or in your house? Or did you beg, borrow, and steal to collect them? Did you have to sign a note to promise to give them back?
No.
So talk about gathering them, and how did you know what you would need in advance?
It's so many things. Yeah, so many things came together, Frank, with this book. It's so many. I mean, it's so many roads came together. One of the roads was the fact that I've been keeping things on my life since I left home. I mean, since I left home at 18. And I didn't know exactly why I was doing that. But my mom was moving some things around, and I took my first grade report cards because it had my teacher's comments on it about how quiet I was in the class and how I always seemed to be listening, but I didn't have anything to say. And I was like, we didn't have Super 8 movies of our family or what we were like as kids. But I was always curious about what kind of child was I? Did I ask questions? Did I raise my hand? The thing that comes back to me tenfold is you were always staring at people. You were always listening. You were always in the room where you weren't supposed to be. You were looking at, lightning bugs and frogs in the pond and tadpoles. You just would like stare for hours. And I always think of this as like the making of the poet. This is how I think I got my curiosity, how I held on to it. I was always trying to figure out questions, answer questions that adults wouldn't answer for me. So I had stockpiled, in this room over here, which you can't see, are 30 boxes of things that have followed me around the world for the last 40, 50 years. They call that in another life and world archival stuff. Well, right now it's just the stuff that I use to figure out how I got to be who I am. The title of this book, Love Child's Hotbed of Occasional Poetry. Love Child is my father's name for me. It was a private name. He never shouted it across the room. Nobody else called me this name. And I remember when I was about 9, my father saying to me, look, this is my name for you. You are my love child. I'm gonna call you that. I want you to know this name because when you get older, you're a Black girl in this world, people are gonna call you other names. And I want you to know who you belong to. I want you to know what you come from, which is love. And I want you to know that this relationship right here should matter to you. So it was like, people gonna call me names? Oh yeah, that happened. And in the first time that happened, I remember immediately holding on to love child. Wait, that's not my name. I'm my father's love child. And so I wanted to show the love that had gone into me, the love that had made me. The poem that is the Lanea Negra that we've been talking about is the title poem from the book. And it's about me thinking about my father and me thinking about being a Black girl in this world, and how that Lanea Negra came together. And so I wanted to, more than anything, to curate a book about those 40 years. And I thought, nobody is gonna pick this up. Nobody's gonna publish this. And I thought to myself, it might be too personal because it does have those 9-year-old letters, that 9-year-old letter in it. But the thing that I wanted to do more than anything was to show this Black girl holding on to her life, holding on to the things that made her. My first reading at the Kroger store, letters from my father. Another road that intersects this moment is my father was leaving the earth physically when this book was coming together. And so in the last 6 months of his life, he stopped talking. I couldn't hear his voice, which I had always heard my entire life. And so I came home one day and I took out one of those boxes, and there were 300 letters from him throughout my life. The moment I left home till he couldn't write anymore. And I would read, and I would sit up and I would forget about the clock. And I realized I was going to that box every night now because when I went to his bedside, he wasn't talking, and I missed that. And I thought, I want to put my father's voice in this book because he is a part of me being who I am, me loving the way we write letters to each other, the storytelling, his love child. And then there was this one note, which maybe I'll read before we leave tonight, but it was from a student. I was doing a workshop in New Orleans, and there was this student who came up to me, and speaking of redaction, he gave me this note before I left this week-long workshop at Xavier College. And the love in this note that he felt from poetry and from me and from our exchange changed him. And I thought, I want this to be the last thing people read when they pick up this book. And I want them to know that you can meet a stranger and in 7 days have them write you a note like this. And this has been the pursuit that I feel most passionate about as a poet, as a teacher, as someone who believes that art is doing things in this world right now that human beings and people who call themselves leaders aren't doing. And I feel like I owe a lot to it. And I wanted to curate and a book that had some of those stories in it.
That's kind of beautiful.
The details are very beautiful. Clearly, when I hear you guys talk about art and even the creation and the birth of these book projects, there's so much more to who you are and what you do. There are a lot of poets who just write poetry, and that's enough for them. I know Nikky, Marvin and Morgan Smith, a film, you wrote that. You have fiction that already exists in the world that's already published. You're working on Frog March, which will be your first novel. Dwayne, New York Times can't sell an issue unless you have something in it.
Yeah, not they can.
Award-winning memoir out there of, in everybody's library of how do you deal with the issue of being labeled, or do you feel limited when you're called a poet, given how much else you do in the world? Does it feel too small for what you do, or are you always just poeting?
Oh man, poetry is the birthplace of the novel, the essay. It's the birthplace of short fiction. It's the birthplace of the song, and so I sort of feel really comfortable calling myself a poet. And in fact, what happens is some of the other work that I do, I think allows me to better be a poet. We live in a world, I should say, and this is not fair for me to say because everybody has their own story. And I say this and it's sort of like, but I am glad that I met Lucille Clifton and Sonia Sanchez and Robert Hayden and Gwendolyn Brooks without a teacher. I read The Big C and Ampersand's biography of Langston Hughes without a teacher. I met Etheridge Knight without a teacher. Dudley Randall's The Black Poets was like my MFA. Michael Harper's Every Shed I Ain't Sleep was my second degree. So I found Yusef Komunyakaa and Wright and all of these folks, Ishmael Reed. I found, it's interesting. Nikky, I found your work working in Caribou. I was like, Walter Mosley wrote the intro to a book of poems. I gotta read this. You know what I mean? And I found this stuff independent of my formal education. And what that meant was I learned to understand the world and a way to understand myself working through this art. And it was always both and, it was always the writing of the essay was trying to do something I couldn't do in a poem. And that was closer to me trying to do the same thing I do in a poem in an essay and trying to do the same thing I do in an essay in a poem. But I don't actually feel constrained. In some ways, I feel challenged. A homeboy called me, he said, you keep talking about how frustrated you are about these New York Times pieces, but you got to understand that like most people don't start writing. My first long essay was in a New York Times magazine and it won a National Magazine Award. And of course, I say that to say that I'm dope. You know what I mean? Like, I want people to know that I'm dope, but mostly because the Black folks that I follow been dope. And they didn't get to be dope in public, right? They didn't get to have acclaim in public. They didn't get to have like their stories told in the same kind of way in public. But also, I say it because what made me write the piece that I wrote in the Times Magazine, the first one I wrote about myself, and even the second one that I wrote about Harris, is because there's certain kind of things that you have to do in a poem to be dope. You can't sing one note. You got to be complicated. And as a poet, that's where I learned that you can't write about the world as if it exists in only one way. And I actually remember we were trying to figure out who to ask to do this thing for the Arizona Poetry Project. And we wanted to ask you. And part of the reason we wanted to ask you, Nikky, is because like I was trying to get writers who weren't connected to the penitentiary in obvious ways. And I knew people were connected. I was like, I could pick a name out of the hat and that person is connected in some kind of way. Because if they're a poet, they soulful and they just touched by it. It's no way that you could live in the world today and not be connected. And you wrote beautiful work. And part of it is because of who you are. But I think part of it is because the aesthetic as a poet, like just demands that you notice and you see things in a way that's not trying to produce, slogans. And so I'm glad to say I'm a poet because it means that my sort of vocation requires me not to produce slogans.
Hey, Frank, when I heard James Baldwin say, the poets are the only people who know the truth about us. The wingspan that I understood, and he meant, he used the word poet, but he meant artists. But the wingspan attached to that line, that one line alone. And then he goes on to say, only the poets know, how it feels to love, how it feels to hurt, I'm saying it poorly, but I'm just saying when you hear that line spoken and you hear Baldwin say it, only the poets know the truth about us. That's not putting a poet up on a pedestal. That's saying what Dwayne just said. Like, your job is to be in the world. Your job is to pay attention. I mean, when Dwayne and company invited me to come out to Arizona, I hadn't even written the last poem in this book. The last poem in this book was really commissioned by an invitation to like be a part of this, what we are doing. And of course it was circling my brain. Of course I went to my journal and I saw this 30-page thing that was all over the place. And the invitation alone made me sit down and do the work to get it right and to do it. And so you're right, Dwayne. I mean, that invitation just kind of opened up all kinds of things for me in terms of justice and my own thoughts about something, about the poem that I ended up writing. And it's too long, but it is what it is. And it stands as a point of entry for me into a moment that I'm really grateful for.
No, but even the letter you wrote us, you know what I mean? Like the letter, I mean, it touched all of us. Cause I was sort of thinking, like, I'm just a penitentiary and it's cool at this point. I was doing an event last night and I answered the phone and the people listening to the event was like, what is that? And it was like, this call comes from a prison in the Virginia Department of Corrections. And I was like, my bad, guys, I got to answer this. And I just put it on speaker and I'm talking to my man and it's like, I feel like I my whole life is like soaked in prison. Mm-hmm. And part of that though means that like, I think sometimes the public expects and believes, and I mean the literary public expects and believes that I'm the only one that cares. And not like me, but like me, Mitchell, Randall, Susan Burton, Frank, folks who like their work has like explicitly touched it before some date, right? And I was like, I don't think that's true. And even in asking, folks was like, I don't know. I don't know. You think so? I was like, man, look, we just going, yeah, we need to get people who we think don't know. And your letter though was more than just saying, I'm gonna figure out how to do this. Your letter was like, I think it made me personally feel like vindicated and like valued and seen. I actually wish that, I mean, yeah, it was powerful, and it was powerful in a way that, and you're the only one. I'm ashamed these other these other people who were part of the project, but like you're the only one who wrote that kind of letter. And it was so interesting because some other folks who I love deeply was like, I don't know if I could do this. And your letter was like, I have to do this, and it made us it made the project truly, and I'm really grateful for it. I remember when I went and ran up on you in that hotel restaurant in DC trying to say hi, interrupting your meal. And I was like, I don't know. How do you tell somebody that you love that work and you love them and you just grateful and thankful to be in the space? And I should have wrote you a letter. Now I see.
I'll be waiting on my letter, just so you know.
Yeah, but you owe Nikky Finney a letter.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're my witness. You're my witness.
Yeah, I'm a witness. And the other 2,000 people watching this.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have enough time, but I would love to talk about the risk-taking, the empathy that you guys, open up and allow on the page. But I want to take it a different direction before I ask you to read something from your collections. I've known you both long enough to not only have sipped bourbon, but to have played full court basketball with you. And of the three of us, only one of us played college ball at Talladega.
Yeah.
Only one of us.
That's not me.
All right. It's not me, so we don't have to say who it is. But given an opportunity and being forced to choose between a basketball shoe in your honor or a top shelf bourbon, what do you choose? Tough choice, I know.
I have never been a woman who allowed myself to be put in a box or a category or one question. I want both. I mean, I think I want both. I'm not gonna put the basketball over the bourbon or the bourbon over the basketball.
Okay, so if you go home, you check your messages, and you heard from a distillery in Kentucky and from Nike, which one do you call back first?
I'd call Uncle Nearest first. That's who I would call.
I call Uncle Nearest too. And the fact that, and this is the thing, this is straight inside basketball. Because if you know who Uncle Nearest is,
oh yeah,
I'll buy you a drink.
That's right.
I remember my UPS man came, right? I ordered 5 bottles of Uncle Nearest, right? So he come through and he dropped it off. I'm like, yo, my man, check this joint out. He's like, what's that? He's like, I don't drink. I'm like, well, I'm not giving you none anyway. but let me tell you this story. It was a black dude, man. He was like, for real? He was like, word? That's the cat that taught Jack Daniels? Man. And it's cool, man. It's like funny because, I think that we bond over stories and even finding out and discovering like who hoops and who has the memory of that thing in their bones. I was listening this cat Wright, I can't remember his name, man, cat from Mississippi, Wright something, but he got a book coming out about Pappy. Came out 2 days ago. But what's wild is he's talking about bourbon distilleries and how Pappy Van Winkle, how it's a world in which to make shit happen. Can you curse on this? Fuck it. It's a world in which like to actually make the drink, you gotta wait 20 years. And what I tell people though, somebody, because I hate when people say this, right? They read your work and they think that poem developed overnight. And I'm like, yo, my poem ain't developed overnight. So don't come at me like that. This joint been soaking here in the oak cask, for like a decade or more. And it might sound like present in this moment. And somebody said, well, you wrote the Kamala Harris piece. I was like, man, those are issues that I've been thinking about for a decade. Don't disrespect me. And I think that's the connection. And I also think it's the connection with hoops. Because when you see somebody who really got game, I'm watching my son on the court at 9 and I'm like, you don't get it, man. Some of the stuff that you're doing right now, it ain't even gonna matter until you 16. But when it matters, it's gonna matter, you know. And it's hard for him to get it, but I see it. I see it in him. You know, he's taking those steps, man, and he's developing a love, and the fruition of that dedication comes later. And so I think that's how the two connect. And I'm a follow the leader and just be like, I'm not even gonna choose. I'm gonna take a bottle of bourbon that's in a shoebox.
Only poets. Poets who are distilleries themselves. How about you both find something to share with our audience? And then I think when you finish, Sarah's going to come back and share some questions from the audience.
You know, you can't get out of the distill moment without repeating Gwendolyn Brooks' poetry is life distilled. You can't just move on without saying that. Come on now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to read a really short thing because I talked about it, and it's the last artifact in the book. And I was teaching a workshop at Xavier University in 1999 when we had 9s in our year. And this young man gave me this note after the workshop. And we had to redact his name out of the book because of some things that we couldn't, so it's a long story, but the redaction, that's the story that you guys were talking about in terms of the other poetry. But anyway, let me just read this. Dear Nikky, if it were a possibility in this world to pick our mothers as we pick our mates, I would choose you. You showed me love like my own mother. Most human beings make the fatal mistake of assuming that one needs less love as they get older. That is why I think there are so many adults with broken dreams and dull smiles. Young children are the only people the world says it is okay to visibly show affection to, and they deserve it. But what is the magic age when the world decides that children are too old to receive the unconditional affection they received when they were younger? All people want is to be loved and to love. Love is the freest thing in this world. The love and knowledge that you gave to me during the week of workshops made me feel free and beautiful too.
Thank you for that. Good.
I keep that over my desk. It's been over my desk since 1999.
I would challenge you whether or not that's the last artifact in the book, though.
Oh, really? Maybe not. Oh, no, we don't.
That's a nice photo, though. I'm gonna read because we was talking about basketball a little bit. I'm gonna read a poem. The only setup is that I was becoming a lawyer, right? And you go to this formal hearing and formal ceremony, and you get sworn in. And my family was there, my mom was there, my wife was there, my boys were there, friends were there. And usually it's 100 people in the room because mine got pushed back because of my felonies. I was the only one there. And after they swore me in, I turned to the audience and I wasn't supposed to speak, but I'm never one to spare words. So I decided to give an impromptu speech. And I was like, the last time I was in a courtroom like this with my mom, I got sentenced to 9 years in prison. And my youngest son didn't know. And I didn't realize that I was telling him. And so telling him that sort of glibly, he got up, looked at me, whispered something in his brother's ear and sat on his brother's lap. He was like 5 at the time. And so later that night at like 2 a.m. when I finally got in the house after we did a few things and went out to the bar, I felt like I had to tell him, and so this poem is about that moment. Essay on reentry. At 2 a.m., without enough spirit spilling into my liver to know to keep my mouth shut. My youngest learned of years I spent inside a box, a spell, a kind of incantation I was under, not whiskey, but history.
Mm.
I robbed a man. This months before Miles would drop bucket after bucket on opposing players. The entire bedraggled bunch, 5 and 6, and he leaping as if every layup erases something. That's how I saw it. My screaming, coaching, sweating presence, recompense for the pen. My father has never played, has never seen me play basketball. It's part of this. My oldest, Makai, he knew, told of my crimes by a stranger. Tell me we aren't running towards failure, is what I want to ask my sons. But it is 2 in the AM. The oldest has gone off to dream in the comfort of his room. The youngest, despite him seeming more lucid than me, just reflects cartoons back from his eyes. So when he tells me, Daddy, it's okay. I know what's happening is some scraggling angel lost from his pack, finding a way to fulfill his duty, lending words to this kid who crawls into my arms, wanting more than stories of my prison, the sleep that he fought while I held court with men who knew that when the drinking was done, the drinking wouldn't make the stories we brought home any easier to tell.
Mm. Thank you. Thank you, Nikky. Woo! Man, I wish we had another hour.
Me too. Me too.
It's so good for me.
Yeah, this was a pleasure. You know, it's strange too because I grew up with y'all, and I grew up with this notion that like literature matters. You know what I mean? Because it's funny because I met you, Frank, when I was like 20, 25. But since that time, I mean, so much has happened, and it's kind of a beautiful thing, man. And I'm really grateful to. So thanks to the festival having me, but more importantly, I think thanks for both of you for having me and sharing some time and some space with me. It's like a humbling thing, you don't really think that somebody could be watching this and imagine that this encompasses in some way the thing they might want to become or the thing that matters to them. And so it's beautiful to be a part of somebody else's narrative in that way.
Hey, Dwayne, I want to say this to you because this line has stayed with me. You said something about you think people think your life is soaked in prison, soaked with prison. Did you say soaked with?
I say soaked with, soaked in, one of those two.
Yeah, well, it's also soaked with beauty. I mean, you couldn't, what you write, so I just want to say, that's what I hear. So
I appreciate that, yeah, because
yeah.
I mean, I got a parole packet right beside me. You know what I mean? It's like, and the thing is like freedom and poetry has always been intertwined before, with me. And I got a parole packet for my homeboy that I'm about to submit on Monday. And like all of it's been of a piece. And so it's a beautiful thing to, be able to do it and be reminded again that freedom and poetry are like a synonymous.
Yeah.
Distilled in life.
Yeah, distilled in life. Yeah, we gotta get to one of them distilleries, man. And we got to.
Come on back. I'll take you on a statewide tour.
All right.
Sarah.
Yeah, thank you all. I was just listening intently. It's really hard to break in. I have chills from hearing you read your poems, so thank you so much for doing that. We do have some questions from some registrants. We had quite a few questions, but I think we only have time for 3 or 4. This first one is from an 8th grade teacher here in Kentucky. She would love to hear, I know her, so Lois, shout out. I'd love to hear the panelists speak about the importance of reading and teaching living poets with teenagers.
That's a good question.
So
I'll let anyone go first who would like to answer.
When I was growing up, I didn't, nobody was teaching me poetry. And when I finally did get some English teachers teaching poetry, they were all dead. And so, but I was reading Jet Magazine, I was reading Gwendolyn Brooks and Mari Evans and Sonia Sanchez. And, you know, so I was reading living poets on my own. And I didn't know any poets in where I was growing up. So just the fact that I could put my eye and heart and ear on living poets who were poets of their time, because I want to be a poet of my time. I want to stand on the earth and do my reporting. And so teaching living poets is so powerful. I mean, there's nothing like it, because sometimes you get to hear their work, sometimes you get to look at their lives, and you get to cobble together how they came to be. So I honor you, Miss Lois, for teaching living poets, because they became my models. That was how I got to hold on to a word, or how I read interviews of poets, and oh, maybe I could do it that way. It's very powerful and it's very important. And if I may add, don't just teach living poets, but teach a diverse array of poets from different neighborhoods and different worlds and different sides of the track. Because sometimes we teach living poets, and those poets don't look like some of those kids in that classroom, and don't sound like some of the kids in that classroom. And then we think, oh, only poets can sound like that. And so you have to deconstruct and de-educate all that stuff. So yes, living poets, and yes, living poets from all walks of life and from all worlds.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say one thing. I'm gonna make an announcement to the Kentucky Book Festival. I've never said this in public, but I am the new poetry editor at the New York Times Magazine. And you know, I mean, and one of the missions, though, straight up, is like we publish living poets, contemporary poets who have books out and the poems are already published. So we only publish previously published work. We are only, like, you know, it's some people on here who will be, Nikki, I'm looking through the book now. So something is going to show up. And my first crop of writers is going to be one of the poems out of this book, because the point is not only to teach living poets, but to find vehicles, right, to make the work of living poets vibrant. You know, the insanity of popular culture is that if you talk about the source, vibe, I don't want to criticize those two in particular, but you talk about contemporary, like, cultural magazines, poetry is absent. It is absent, and so it becomes absent from the lexicon of many, you know, people who live in this country. And by teaching living poets, I think they introduce it. My first job was one of my earliest jobs out of prison was teaching poetry. Might have been my first legit job, but one of, you know, my earliest jobs were teaching poetry to middle school students and high school students and elementary school students, and we did rely so much on living poets because it mattered. It mattered to teach some work of somebody who was writing about the world in which folks lived in right now. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful question, and I can't wait, you know, to start. I haven't nothing has come out. That's me. I think my first one might come out in January or February, but I'm pulling the first few together now, and I'm really excited about looking at new poets, and it's a burden and an honor to be like, you get to usher, you know, a good 50 voices into the world to new people. And it's primarily short poems, but it's kind of like a beautiful thing. So nobody else heard this before now. Now, yeah, I know.
Right, now we all know. Thank you for that. Let me just squeeze this in. You know, growing up, I used to believe that I didn't hear or know any real poets until I was a college student. And it wasn't until my education broadened that I realized that I had been listening to Stevie Wonder my whole life, Marvin Gaye my whole life, and eventually learned to understand that there are artists who do the work that poets do, but they do it in their own art form. And when you go to Alvin Ailey and have Revelations move you to tears, you know, something is happening. When you see The Wiz live with Stephanie Mills singing Home.
You saw the Mills live? No, you didn't, man.
That's how old I am. You know, high school senior, fifth row center, being recruited by Center College I had that grand opportunity to be in that space when they came through. And I had never experienced art that was the combination of great writing, great music, great choreography, great costuming, a great story that was about me with my family in the center of it. I was most confounded by the fact that I was just raining tears. I had no idea why. I had to think about that for weeks, about why I was moved. But for me, it was a religious experience. The poetry was so powerful because of all that artistry. I know that did something to me that still affects me today. But at the same time, I hope that if it's about considering bringing people into the classroom, you don't have to look that far to find a poet willing to come.
You don't.
They are everywhere. Don't wait for them to be famous to invite them. That means even more. In fact, that might meet your budget even better.
And they could be mediocre. I mean, the reality is that like they could be earnest and mediocre, but that don't matter, because like for real, a 6th grader, 7th grader, high school kid, like, it's easy to recognize the exceptionalism of Stephanie Mills, right? But the truth is, I have been mediocre many a times in the 8th and 9th grade classroom, and it mattered to those kids because I was there. You know what I mean? Like, I ain't even have to be good at my job. I just had to like show up. One time I cursed a group of kids out and left because they were afraid to. It was this long story, and then I had a basically a nervous breakdown, but it wasn't really a nervous breakdown. But I was just like devastated that the kids wouldn't say their name to the man who was apologizing for not being a good teacher. And so I snapped on him for it, right? And I left, and the kids was like, "Yo, is Mr. Dwayne never coming back again?" And I had, and I came back the next day and I sort of apologized, and they was like, "No, it's us." And I was horrible as an adult that day, right? And it just mattered that I was there, and even in my being horrible, my being there allowed me to apologize, and I think we all learned something. So, yeah, invite folks, invite them.
Again, as Nikky said, that was your beauty coming through. That's a beautiful thing. Kids learn a lot of stuff by watching. One of the things that's hard for them to learn is how to apologize. How to back away from confrontation. How to walk away from pain with your head up. A lot of them do wild stuff out of embarrassment and think that's the only option. But if we could model for them, how to have a mediocre day and walk it backwards and then forward again, we've done something there. So, you might have changed a whole lot of lives in that room. Beautiful poet that you are, Papa coach, memoirist, poet, baller, who still has good knees. I'm so jealous.
I'm 40, man. My knee's 40 now. I feel like I feel like Nikky is timeless. Frank, you coming up there now. Although that mohawk, man, you could disguise all kinds of hair loss with that. I'm about to, because I be losing it right here. I'm getting the mohawk. Nikky, I gotta say, man, I'm always jealous looking at you. And it's like, I cut my locks a long, long time ago. I don't know how you keep such like a stunning public appearance as if you haven't aged for like the last 25 years. And I feel like every year I'm gaining 10. So I don't know if that works as a compliment or not, but I gotta say that me and Frank are losing our hair. It's just gaining.
Well, why you gotta bury a dig on Frank inside a compliment for Nikky?
It was a dig with me too. I'm losing my hair. You just can't tell. It's like,
Finney, you may have the last word, please.
I thought that was another question. Sara had another question. I know there were a lot of questions, but I think are we out of time?
We have 1 minute left, so we can't do a question and an answer.
Okay.
We could go 2 minutes over.
So you want a question?
Yes, I want a question. I want to get out of this right here.
Please give us a question, Sara.
I can give you another question. It's kind of a big question, but we'll see what we can do with it. You've talked a bit about your collections and how you pulled together the inspiration for your poems. One of the questions that we got was asking if you could discuss the process for shaping individual poems into a full-length collection. I know that's a huge question, but
I have a short answer.
Okay.
I don't know if Dwayne has a short answer, but I have a short answer. So when I'm working on editing a poem, I know what I want trying to get. I know what I'm feeling from it so far, and I'm drafting. I'll never forget that my process is to think about what a person does when they whittle a piece of wood. And you think, oh, I want this to be a face, right? I want this to be a hand. I want this to be whatever. And you cut into it, and you cut, okay, there's the lips are coming there, and the eyes are coming there, and the beard, and I want there to be this beautiful African nose. Okay, I got, everything's coming. And you just keep working on it. You keep working on it because you don't know exactly where you're going, but you have an idea. And if you go too far, you cut the nose off. If you are not paying attention to what is happening with the wood carver over there, you will lop the ear off. You will have to start over again. But if you are paying attention to what you're twirling things around and you're looking at the back and the head and the dimension of the piece, and when you get to having what the path you were following and the thing you were thinking about, you stop. Because if you keep polishing and it will become something else. So I'm following my belly, I'm following my head, I'm following my heart, and I'm following my hands because I'm very tactile. And so it's longer than that, but I really think of wood and whittling when I am working on a poem.
That's lovely.
Period. With a T. Sara, take us out.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Nikky, for that answer. And thank you so much to all of you for being here and reading your work, and Frank for leading the discussion. Thank you as well to our sponsor, the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning. We also want to thank you out there on Zoom watching this or Facebook. Thank you so much for being a part of the 2020 Kentucky Book Festival online. If you're interested in purchasing one of the books discussed today, please visit our independent bookstore partner, Joseph Beth Booksellers, at josephbeth.com. On November 14th, Joseph Beth will offer 10% off all book purchases in store here in Lexington. Frank's book is available at his publisher, accentspublishing.com, and that was very recently published, so congratulations, Frank, for that new work. For a complete schedule of Kentucky Book Festival conversations, visit kyhumanities.org and follow us on social media at kyhumanities. For Kentucky Humanities, I'm Sara Woods.